Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I am Bluddworth, and as you can see by the graphics, today I'm doing a new kind of video. I've never done anything like this before, where I recently mentioned that I had picked up the three-book series of Barbarian Life from Roy Thomas, and I do have the Conan the Barbarian comic book series, the complete run of the original Marvel comics, Conan the Barbarian. So what I decided to do was I was going to read each chapter of Barbarian Life as it relates to each of the first 54 comic books that of Conan the Barbarian that Roy Thomas had written, and wow, what a fun ride it was actually beginning to read Barbarian Life. Really enjoyed the first chapter of it. Really stoked about reading the rest of the series, and certainly going to from time to time do these videos. If it comes out successfully, obviously, and so without further ado, let's go right into this. So I'm going to switch over here to full screen, just to show that I do in fact have the original series. So this is number one, and I am going to keep it inside this. I'm not going to do a flip through of this. Now, this was labeled, I'm trying to remember back when I got this. I'm going to guess that I picked this up in the late 1980s. Even though it's labeled here as $100, I'm almost certain I paid $80 for this. So I might have gotten it for 20% off at the time. It was labeled Paper Moon Comics. And since I don't recall actually going to Paper Moon Comics, I didn't do the research to see where that actually was. Someplace on Long Island, obviously, Long Island, New York. I probably picked this up at a comics book convention at the time. So there is my original. It is in an acid-free slip with an acid-free board, kept in an acid-free box. So considering I bought this probably close to 30, almost 30 years ago, it still looks in the same condition it was when I bought it. However, I'm not going to actually flip through this as I stated. So I have a backup for actually showing the comic. But before I show the comic, let's get to the book. And let's see if we drag that. There we go. So taking a look at the book, and I will try to. It's been harder and harder to get these to work out the way that I prefer. But so here is Barbarian Life, Literary Biography of Conan the Barbarian, Volume Number 1 by Roy Thomas. And this was put out by Pulp Hero Press. And you can see that it's going to go through the table of contents. So we're going to start with number 1 and go through, like I said, I may or may not do every one of these video because it would be quite extensive, but you can see this book here is going to cover the first 51 Conan the Barbarian comic books. So here's the publisher's note, and I will actually go through this a little bit. So this is the first of the two-volume set written by Roy Thomas that chronicles the comic book life of Robert E. Howard's Conan, as revealed in the first 100 or so issues of Conan the Barbarian that Roy wrote for Marvel Comics, with art by Barry Windsor Smith, Gil Kane, and John Buscema. The first volume takes us through issues 51 and the conclusion of the 6-part Curse of Conjurer saga. The second volume will take us the rest of the way through Roy's initial tenure on the series. Can't read straight. In addition to Roy, without whom there wouldn't have been anything to publish, and who more than anyone except Robert E. Howard himself deserves credit for turning a pulp hero into an enduring American pop culture icon, this book owes its existence to several other honorary Hyborians. Pat Mason, who flawlessly translated various Spanish language articles for which we couldn't find Roy's original English versions. Barry Pearl, who provided the top-notch cover scans. Benito Gallego, who drew the cover art and who contributed some of his original black and white art, and I've scattered throughout the book. And then back in the early 1970s, when I was 8 or 9 years old, I read Marvel Comics, only Marvel Comics, and many of them, usually my favorites, were written by Roy Thomas. So I had made the claim, the statement, and I stand by it, that after Robert E. Howard, Roy Thomas was the best Conan the Barbarian author. I put him above that of Elsbrog de Camp. I put that above of Lynn Carter. Certainly put it above, put him above Robert Jordan. It literally goes for me, Robert E. Howard to Roy Thomas, and I will stand by that argument any day. So, as I started reading this, I really enjoyed this book. All right, it goes through an introduction, and Roy Thomas is talking about just the fact that, when he was first introduced to the idea of picking up a sword and sorcery fantasy character, Conan the Barbarian wasn't his first choice. And it certainly wasn't even his favorite first choice at the very beginning either. So he was the number 2 man of the editors of Marvel Comics at the time. So just one step below Stan Lee, which is an amazing story in itself. And he started going through and talking about how he had written, eventually a series of articles, all for a Spanish magazine at the time. And originally, he had done all of this in, I believe it was 100 articles, all written there. And he really thought that the articles were lost. But thanks to his wife, they had gone into some storage and started looking through, and they found quite a number of the original transcripts of what would become this book. And then from memory and from some translation, he was able to recapture some of the original stories. So the way this book is broken down is that it deals with, each chapter is an issue of Conan the Barbarian. He begins off here talking about first searching for an IP. So they were looking for a sword and sorcery comic series to do for Marvel, and Conan actually was not their first choice. Their first choice was going to be Elsbrog de Camp's character, but that was going to fall through. Then they looked at Lynn Carter, and Lynn Carter had a character that Stan Lee actually liked the name more so, and that was Throngar. And I will look for the actual thing. So Throngar in the City of Magicians. And so here it talks about how they thought that the name Throngar, or at least certainly Stan Lee, liked the name Throngar more than more than Conan. And there was some discussion as to, the initial cost per that they would have to give to the licensee, and their limit was set at $150 per comic book that would go to the licensee, and that was the cap. All right, and Conan was actually going to cost $200. That's when they discovered that the holder of the IP at the time was Glenn Lord, and so when Roy Thomas approached Glenn Lord, he was, shocked that he could get it for $200, and that was $50 above the price that he was authorized to pay for the IP. And so, he had basically told Stan Lee that he would come up with the other $50 out of his own pocket, out of his own fees, and he would do some of the writing, initially for free to offset that extra $50 cost. And so that's where they went to get both the IP, and he agreed. Roy Thomas agreed to write for the comic, at least for its initial runs, to get it launched. I got two here on the same thing. So then they started searching for an artist, and the very first artist that came to mind was John Buscema. And John Buscema, Roy Thomas actually declared that John Buscema was the best artist working for Marvel, and probably the best artist working in the industry, period. All right, that was Roy Thomas's, belief that it was, this was the way that we should go. We should go with John Buscema. However, John Buscema was getting paid roughly, I believe it was like $20 a page, and these comics being, close to, I believe the industry standard was about 32 pages. It was still kind of out of the price range between the IP costing an extra $50 and then going with a top-notch artist. It was really going to push the publisher Goodman's, buttons to the point that he might just shoot the whole project down. So they had to find somebody a little bit less than what the page count was going to cost with John Buscema. They started looking at Gil Kane, and they still wanted to go a little bit less than that, still trying to cover up the fact that they paid the extra $50 for the IP to begin with. And so they ultimately went with the vaguely known young artist of Barry Windsor Smith. So their interactions with Barry Windsor Smith in the very beginning were really quite comical, because they, Barry Smith had sent some copies, some proofs of some of his artwork, and they saw the potential in it. And Stan Lee actually said, "Listen, if you ever find your way in New York City, swing by Marvel, and we'd like to talk." And so Barry just jumped on a plane, and was there in very quick order, because you can imagine, and that's where it's talking about here. You can imagine, geez, I just got a letter back from, from the Stan Lee, saying if I ever find myself in New York City. So of course he jumped on a plane and he got there as soon as he possibly could. And so the story goes on, into further detail how they brought it along, and slowly worked some of his artwork. And initially it was like, wow, it's close to what they were looking for. They felt that he was kind of holding back. And then finally, when it all came together, they realized that, you know what, we actually have something going here. And it reads, while it took until the second issue before we were sure, Stan and I, and for the most part the fans, quickly realized that Barry had taken a decisive step forward and would never again be considered a second choice to anyone. His artwork helped make Conan the Barbarian one of the most outstanding comics of the 1970s, and he himself became one of the most respected and imitated comic artists of that time. Despite the adverse circumstances and despite an initial $50 an issue misunderstanding, sometimes things turn out okay. All right, and so that was pretty much it. So I really enjoyed this first paragraph, this first chapter of the book. Really looking forward to the rest. So now let's start taking a look at the comic that they put together. So here we have Conan the Barbarian #1, originally put out at 15 cents an issue. So you start to see, like, when they have to pay they paid Glenn Lord $200 per issue to make, and they spoke in the book about where the typical run of a Marvel comic would sell in the six figures. So if they go and they say, all right, we're making, we're paying $100, $200 per issue, and the issue is going to sell 150, let's say 100,000 copies at 15 cents a copy. You can already see that there's a huge profit margin that Marvel is making. It really shows you what an industry giant that they were. And even if they're paying their, they're paying their artist at, at $15 to $20 a page, their total outlay is about $800, maybe even $1,000 at the most if they're going with their top individual, and that if they're selling a minimum of 100,000 copies at 15 cents a copy, they're making, if I'm doing my math, about $1,500 per comic. All right, and it's costing them, no, I'm sorry, maybe $15,000 per comic book, and they're making a profit of about $14,000 a comic book. So I'm terrible with math. I didn't sit down and actually figure this out. But let's take a look at this. So here is Barry Windsor Smith's the first look that the fans had at Conan the Barbarian. And actually the first chapter actually spoke about the fact that they liked the way that his horns were in the front of his horned helmet, which they said in many of the action scenes, it gave Conan that very charging bull-like view of him. They really spoke about the way that he was going to be dressed, and it was intentional to have that necklace on him. It was intentional always to have the fur loincloth kind of just the dress on him as far as his pants were concerned. And Conan very rarely was depicted as wearing armor. It was only when he was in combat much later on as either a captain or later on a general that he would be seen wearing armor. But typically he's not wearing armor other than the bracers and a belt and loincloth and such, usually sandaled feet, as you can see here. And so here is, the first views that fans had of Conan the Barbarian. And I also talked about the history of the title of the comic book as well, because Conan the Barbarian was only used once in one of the Gnome Press books put together, I believe, by Lynn Carter. And so Robert E. Howard always referred to him as Conan the Cimmerian, never as Conan the Barbarian. So that was another interesting thing where they came up with the title of the comic book series as well. And you can see here that the panels and such. I'm not going to read through this now. The Conan comic books that I'm showing here came off of a website that was an archive of various comic books, so PDFs that you can find on online. And as I mentioned, many of the panels, it looks like he's like a charging bull because those horns are on the front instead of the side. He's fighting here in a battle between Azir and Vanir. Now, Azir, they had to change the name of the country that they came from. It couldn't have been Asgard because they didn't want to cross over into the realm of the Marvel characters of Thor and the North mythos that they were using for there. So they changed the name of the country that the Azir were coming from. But they left Vanir and Vanaheim the same, even though Robert E. Howard, spelt the Vanir without the I in it, so it's just the VANR to it. But they kept the country name of Vanaheim for the Vanir intact. So just some history from Barbarian life that Roy Thomas spoke about as far as the writing of the Hyborian Age and the setting of the comics was involved. And just like the original Robert E. Howard stories, you never actually see a story of Conan in his native Cimmeria. He is always depicted as either being far, far to the north or in the lands and the kingdoms of the south. But very few, if any, stories of Conan in his home country of Cimmeria, which he really didn't like very much. From my readings, he was happy to have left. And so you can see there. That was one of the things that the publisher wanted. The publisher wanted a little bit of sorcery. So the publisher was Goodman, and he really wanted, or I shouldn't say the publisher, the producer, I guess, the money man behind Marvel Comics. He wanted this to have a little bit of sorcery. He obviously wanted there to be swordplay, and he wanted, these winged creatures that was also mentioned in the Barbarian life, the first chapter. So these were things that Roy Thomas was, made sure to include in this first comic in order to make it, in order to get it past what Goodman really wanted in this comic book series. There's some advertisement page here. Always interesting to take a look at these things here. So we have play rock guitar in 3 days. 1 cent for, what is it we got here? There was something being sold for 1 cent. 49 different Bonanza, 10 cents. Kind of hard to read these. 225 stamps, only 10 cents. And this book was, comic was printed in 1970. So let me get back to the comic itself. You can learn to draw comics at home from experts. No salesman, no contracts. Send 25 cents for full information. Art Director's Course. Manhasset, New York. They mentioned this scene here, and they talked about, this was kind of inspired by Stanley Kubrick's Space Odyssey 2000 and 2001, and where you see the so this is a vision that Conan has, where he's seeing, all of these things going on in that vision of space travel and such, and the vision itself actually caused the sorcerer who generated this vision to go crazy, to go insane. So it had driven him mad, and you kind of see that here. Just the realization of the passage of time and technology and such. Death to the Harbingers of Hell. He obviously destroys whatever was creating the images and such, and he saves the girl. So the Barbarian page is a kind of a breakdown of what the world was like. So this you'll see in both the regular comic book series, and I believe they duplicated in the Savage Sword of Conan as well. And this is how they wrapped up every comic book, and the Savage Sword magazine that comes later also included these as well. So once again, I mean, there you have it. It was a very enjoyable read. I'm really looking forward to digging through and going through these, going through the each chapter. And then I will take out and show, yes, I do in fact have the comics in question, but I will continue using the PDF and just scrolling through it and trying to connect up what I read in the book and then showing you just the sample of the comic book itself as we go through. And like I said, I'm probably not going to do all 54 of these, but I will pick out, you know, a few of the stories that are really important stories. So I certainly will do one for the Tower of the Elephant, which would be issue number 4. I would certainly do one of, you know, looking through like Rogues in the House is another one that is a, you know, the Frost Giant's daughter is a classic, very important Conan the Barbarian story, and so on. I mean, there are so many that are really important. When I get to the Song of Red Sonja, so you'll see an appearance of Red Sonja in Conan the Barbarian. So that will be an important one to also come out. Just looking through and just looking for those, you know, really important ones that that were the important stories of Robert E. Howard's that he had written. And then, Red Nails, I skipped over Red Nails. So that will be issue number 22. So, as I said, I've never done any videos like this before. So, if you have any comments or questions about, you know, hey, you know, try to do it this way, or you know, just give me some tips of what you liked about it as well. If you like to, hey, you know, spend more time going over the comic, then that's something that I'll do, especially if I can, you know, connect up directly, you know, the book and what I was going through with the book to the actual comic as well. You know, I'll certainly do that. So thanks for joining. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more of this series, you know, please feel free to, you know, tell me, hey, you know, take a look at this particular comic if you're familiar with the comics themselves. Because like I said, I have them all. And so now that I have these, you know, this series of books that I can actually specifically look at ones by your request. So subscriber requests, I will certainly do that as well. If you have any favorite stories of Conan through the comics, numbers 1 through 51 is what I'm going to be able to share with you here. So once again, thanks for joining. Enjoy the last bits of your weekend. I look forward to seeing you on a gaming screen soon. I'm just waiting for one more item to come in the mail that I purchased on eBay. So I will have another mail call video coming up very, very soon. Possibly even today if I do get the other delivery today, because sometimes UPS does deliver on Sundays. So if I do get that, I will do another video later on this afternoon, but certainly by either tomorrow or Tuesday. I know that's when the potential of that last arrival will come. So again, thanks for joining. Have a great rest of your weekend. Stay safe out there, and I look forward to seeing you on a gaming screen sometime soon. Take care.